So for your first speaker, we have two, is Kimberly Grenowitzki. I always hope to say your last name right. She is a licensed pediatric occupational therapist with specialty certification in feeding, eating, and swallowing, an international board certified lactation consultant, and a certified neonatal therapist based in Michigan. She supports families with feeding and swallowing challenges in infant and young children, including those with complex medical conditions. Kim has over 15 years of experience in both home settings and leading medical institutions, including Children's Hospital Los Angeles and Lucille Packard Children's Hospital in Stanford. She earned her doctorate of occupational therapy from the University of Southern California. As a mom of two young children, Kim is passionate about bridging pediatric healthcare with real life family experiences from birth to solids to shared family meals. Your second speaker is Carrie Rappaport. She is a pediatric occupational therapist and international board certified lactation consultant with over 20 years of experience supporting families across the full spectrum of feeding, from breast and bottle feeding and picky eating to dysphagia, tube feeding, and complex food refusal. She has worked in diverse clinical settings, including pediatric outpatient clinics, inpatient hospitals, in home private practice, and rural primary care in federally qualified health center. She is also a mom of two. In 2017, Carrie and Kim co-created a continuing educational program offering courses on breastfeeding, oral motor skills, swallowing, and selective eating. Their course have been featured in clinical trainings from programs at Stanford University, the University of Southern California, California Children's Services, and pediatric therapy clinics nationwide. These courses now serve as a foundation for Solid Starts Pro and its global pediatric community. So we had their training before. Our parent coaches loved their training, and they were the ones to advocate for us to bring this training to you today. Most of you have received already their book. So we did send all of the Welcome Baby sites a Solid Starts book. You should have received it. But if you didn't, please message me. As a special incentive, today we are providing you a book. And I know we have some county folks here with us today. So if you would like a book, we have some available for you. They generously donated a lot of books to us for our network. And so we want to make sure everyone has one. And I'll be sending out an email with details about how you can pick it up. But yeah, we're so grateful to have you here both again. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having us. And Carrie and I will get started, but just so everybody knows, we are very low key speakers. If you have questions, please stop us, raise your hand, put it in the chat box. We'd rather make sure that all of your questions are answered as we go along. Do not feel like you can't, dive in at any time. I also apologize up front. I'm on my first toddler cold of the season and I'm still quite snotty, but I'm doing my best to get it out. So let me get the
Well, she does that. I'm going to say hi to Lisa, who I've not seen in, but it's probably been like 10 years, but so nice to see your face. We worked together at Children's LA and had babies at the same time.
Where are we? Okay. Are we good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So like Jennifer said, we're going to be talking today about starting solid specifically, and we're going to dive deep into letting baby take the lead from the beginning. So this has been called a baby-led weaning approach, but more importantly, we're really just focusing on following baby's lead from the time you start solids. Quickly, we do have to disclose that we are paid consultants for some educational companies, including the Lactation OT, and we are full-time salaried employees at Solid Starts right now, but the information we are providing for you today is based on our own clinical practice and our work over the last 20 plus years together in clinical settings and in home settings, and we're really happy to share with you. So you guys, Jennifer already gave a great little intro on all of our stuff.
All right, I'm not going to go through these, extensively, but essentially we're going to talk about developmental signs of readiness that show you baby is ready to start solids, especially to start solids using this type of approach that is very baby-led and very much different than the traditional approach of starting with purees. We're going to talk about how to position baby safely at the table so that they have the support that they need to explore food. We'll talk about finger foods and how to prepare them safely, foods to avoid, things like that. We'll talk about gagging and choking, and we'll also talk about introducing baby to allergens and how to do that safely. And then we'll end by just going over some of our resources and things that are available to clinicians and families alike.
All right. So when we wanted to first start talking about readiness, because of course this is something that I'm sure all of you start discussing with clients even on the early side. And I know when I took my kids into their 4-month appointment, this came up. But we as feeding therapists, we wanted to look at readiness from a developmental perspective. And so when we started diving into the literature, we found a wide variety of things. But at the end of the day, there was no black and white answer to this. So the CDC, the WHO, all of our big governing medical bodies all recommend exclusive breastfeeding and or bottle feeding for the first 6 months of life, and starting solids when baby is showing signs of developmental readiness. Now, what exactly are the signs of developmental readiness? Depending on, again, what resource you look at, you're going to see a little bit of variation. But when we were trying to come up with a standard here, we wanted to think about what baby needs to do to safely and actively participate in the activity of feeding. For that, we want to make sure that they are going to be safe, number one. And number two, we want them to be able to actively use their body to participate. So the first thing we're looking at is we want them to be able to sit with a little bit of help. Now, this doesn't mean they can sit perfectly upright and the baby can be placed on the floor and you can walk away and the baby can play without toppling over. This doesn't mean they have to be able to transition from prone or supine into sitting independently. This just means that they can sit in the high chair and hold their body and their head and neck upright for 5 to 10 minutes without completely toppling over. The next thing that kind of goes along with this is the ability to actually use their arms and hands when they're sitting. Sometimes a 4-month-old can sit in a high chair, but they have to use all of their ancillary muscle groups to hold themselves upright. If you asked them to reach for something or gave them an opportunity to use their arms and bring their hands towards their mouth, they would completely topple over. But your baby that's showing signs of readiness for solids is able to not only sit in a high chair or sit up, but they can use their hands to pick up a toy, pick up something in front of it, lift it up, look at it with their look at it, bring it to their mouth, etc. So they're able to actually use their arms and hands when they are sitting. And then the final thing we're looking at is we want them to be interested in solids. Again, a 4-month-old or a young baby, you bring them to the table, they might kind of look around, they'll fall asleep, they might want to nurse, they get a little bit fussy, but they're not really aware of what's going on around them. But a 5, 6-month-old baby, they come to the table and they're like, what are you doing? What is that thing? And they're watching the spoons go into their parents' mouth. They're engaged. Sometimes they're even reaching for the food. But that cognitive interest in food and eating shows up somewhere around 6 months. And this is actually extremely important for baby to be engaged and interested and want to eat. So this first video here is Blythe, and she's 5.5 months old. And she's sitting in her high chair. So the high chair would be considered the minimal support here. She's able to move her feet around. She's looking around. Is she perfect in this chair? No, she probably would get tired after a while, but she's able to shift her body around. If we were to hand her a toy here, she'd most likely be able to reach and grab it. And then Riley over here next to Blythe is 6 months old. Turn this down because mom is talking to her. But she is like eyes on mom, watching those chopsticks pick up every piece of food and bring it up to her mouth. She's even putting her own hand in her mouth, like, I wonder if I can participate in this activity too. So that interest in food and eating is really, really strong around 6 months.
And again, it's very easy to use age as the marker for families to start solids at 6 months, or some clinicians will say at 4 months. But the reality is it's when those skills show up. So we often say around 6 months, most babies will show those skills, no earlier than 4 months, because the research is clear that prior to 4 months, baby will not be showing those skills, and they're probably not ready from a gut perspective. And we like these videos because they really highlight the difference in development between 4 to 6 months, because a lot of families will say, I think my baby's ready at 4 months. They're showing some really nice skills. And you can see in this video of baby Maeve here that at 4 months, she is showing some pretty nice skills. So she is sitting in a boppy pillow, so she has some minimal support. Her parent is behind her. But you can see that even though she can keep her head and neck up, she can keep her trunk up and her body up, she is falling forward and she doesn't have enough stability in her core to use her hands or to pay good attention to these toys. These are brightly colored, really interesting toys that should pull her attention. And if she could, she would reach out and grab them because she's an interested baby. And actually, if you laid her down on her back, and held one of those toys up, I guarantee you Maeve would reach up and grab it and bring that to her mouth. But in sitting, she doesn't have enough stability in her trunk to do it, and that impacts her participation. It impacts her interest. And then if you look at her again, just a few months later at 6 months, her sitting has vastly improved. She's not using the pillow anymore. Is her sitting perfect? No. In just a second, she's going to topple. There you go, topple over. Her sitting is still in progress, but it's so much more stable than it was at 4 months. And because of that, she's able to use her arms really flexibly to reach out, grab a toy, and immediately bring it to her mouth. And that interest piece follows because she can sit up, because she can now use her arms. She is showing more active interest in the toys in front of her. And if you brought her to the table, you would see the same sorts of things. So could she start solids at 4 months? More than likely, yes, especially if you gave her some adaptive support, like you reclined her a little bit and you gave her purees and not table foods. But would that be a successful experience for her? Would she be at her safest? And would she be actively engaged and interested? Likely no, because she doesn't have those foundational skills yet that she will very soon develop by around 6 months old.
I think it's important just to mention that there's a lot of talk about, well, isn't there a nutritional benefit of starting solids at 4 months? We're going to talk about allergen introduction a little bit later. So there is something to say about introducing allergens early, but the research that has been done so far has not shown any nutritional benefit of starting solids before developmental readiness. They've even looked at the differences in iron stores for babies that started solids at 4 months versus waited until they were ready around 6 months. And there was no difference in iron stores either. So and this is just the mom in me coming out, but like, man, push out the gross diapers longer. Like, let's wait until the baby's ready, showing those signs that they want to engage. We don't necessarily have a nutritional benefit of starting early. So let's just follow baby's lead and meet them where they're at and give them this new task when they're ready for it. All right.
Okay, so once baby is showing those signs of developmental readiness, what now? What does that look like? So we're going to go through and talk a little bit more about how you create that safe eating environment, how to do starting solids in a baby-led way. We're going to talk about foods to avoid. We're going to talk about choking and gagging and allergen introduction. So that's sort of the flow of what we're going to do. And then when it comes to positioning your baby at the table, a high chair is not necessary, but it is one of the easiest ways to get baby positioned at the table safely and with good support. It is not super important which high chair you choose because most can be modified to be made into the standards that we're going to describe here, or to hit the important points that we're going to talk about here. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that baby is positioned as upright as possible. So I said this a little bit ago or a moment ago, if baby's around 4 months old, you could recline them and they could sit a little bit better at the table like that. But reclined is not a great position for starting solids because we want to use baby's trunk to help support their arms. When they're more upright, it helps support their respiratory system. And when they're more upright, it supports their interest. Finally, when they're more upright, it allows gravity to work with them, not against them. So when they're reclined, gravity is naturally pulling things back towards the throat. We actually don't want that, even though it may seem like that's a helpful thing to get food move to the back of the throat. We want baby's skills or motor skills to work on moving that food back. We do not want gravity to do that work for baby and to surprise baby by pulling the food back into their throat too quickly. So as upright as possible is important. And as you see here, this chair that baby Mila is sitting in on the left is a chair that will recline or may even naturally have a reclined feature to it if you don't modify it, but it can be very easily modified by putting a towel roll or a pillow or something behind her. So this little flap that's right behind Mila's back has a towel roll behind it that is now pushing her forward. So she's sitting nice and upright. So even if the chair naturally has a reclined function to it or is reclined, help the family understand that it doesn't take much to get the baby sitting more upright. Another component of the high chair that we think is important is a foot plate. This allows baby to have something to rest their feet on. While this is not completely essential, it creates for a more comfortable sitting situation and sitting environment. If you sat on a high bar stool with no footrest on it, even as adults who are strong and have core strength, our bodies start to fatigue quickly. It's uncomfortable. It does not allow us to focus on other things because we're so worried about our stability in the chair. So having a place to rest their feet and push their feet is supportive to the rest of their body, especially to their respiratory system and their endurance. So while it is common that chairs don't have this feature, you can usually add this feature. For example, in this chair, the footrest that is there is way too low. So the parent added a pasta box that's been put on its side and taped down. Nice. I like that, Kim. Laser
Just
feature.
figured out I could do that.
I love
Only
that.
been doing Zoom
Learn
for like 6 years here, but look at how cool that is.
every time. So that pasta box has been added by the parent. That could be a phone book. That could be a number of different things. Just an empty, cardboard box put on its side so that baby's feet can reach that and push against it. Make sure that the baby has a high chair that can come right up to the table. That's another piece of it's not a requirement, but it's just a nice way to bring baby to the table. So in this example, this high chair can be rolled up to the table, but even better if you can remove the tray. So if the tray comes off and the table itself, where everyone else is seated, is the table for baby, that's ideal because we want baby to come to the table with the family. We know in every other element of development that baby learns best by watching their caregivers. So baby coming to the table and watching their parent eat has immense value. And pulling baby and their high chair away from the table and just feeding baby separate from the rest of the family is going to impact baby's ability to understand what's expected of them, and oftentimes leads to baby being less interested in engaging in the meal. So
It,
go
that's
ahead.
just had something pop into my head too, from a perspective of, as nurses, when you're going into the home and you're providing recommendations for these families and support, bringing the baby to the table can be something that you can consider a safety precaution as well, because it is very easy to put a baby in a high chair, put them in the corner, and then go do the dishes or go do something else in the kitchen because they're just removed from the activity that you're doing. When the baby is pulled up to the table, it kind of clicks your brain in like, oh, we should be sitting at the table doing this together. Supervising the baby, whether they are eating purees, finger foods, whatever it is, should be number one priority for safety for the family. So this is just a good way to kind of get that in their habit, that getting baby to the table helps you remember, I need to do this with them, and that helps with supervision and safety. Sorry, I don't know why that just popped into my head.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks. And then the last piece of positioning baby at the table, and you can see it really clearly here in this video of Mila on the right, is that baby needs to be positioned high enough that they have good clearance of their arms. In this video, she's seated too low. And as clinicians who go into the family's home, if a parent tells you baby is struggling, they're not feeding themselves, they're not reaching out for the food, they lose interest quickly, check this piece because I see it all the time, especially when babies are just starting out, because a lot of high chairs will position baby too low. And while she can clear her arms, the tray in this video is up around her armpit height. So she's having to hike her shoulders and lift her arms like this. She's going to get tired and it is going to impact her coordination. If the baby was seated a little higher, and you can see it in this position picture on the left, when she's seated a little higher, and in this example, all she has is a towel roll folded up and put under her booty. So it elevates her a little bit. You can sit her on a phone book, you can sit her on a folded up pillow or anything like that that just lifts her up a little bit. She now has good clearance, so her arms rest down on the tray, not up here on the tray, which again will give her better coordination and will likely help her participate for longer in the mealtime. So high chairs are not an essential piece, like I said before, but they are a very convenient and easy way to position baby safely at the table to support exploring food with a reduced risk of choking. If the family cannot afford a high chair, there are plenty of other options. These are two that we love. One is just simply bringing baby to the table and sitting them on your lap. This is also a great strategy, again, when you have families that describe a hesitant baby, a baby who is not interested or who isn't participating. Get them out of the high chair for a few days or a week, bring them onto the parent's lap and to the table in that way. A lot of times being close to their caregiver, seated on their lap, being right up at the table next to them while the caregiver eats their own food can be a great low stress, low pressure way to get baby engaged. You can see here baby's body supported by dad's body. So baby has a ton of trunk support. In this example, baby is putting their feet against the very chair that dad's sitting on, but know that even if they don't have a great footrest, that they're still getting so much support to their trunk that oftentimes the footrest is a little less important, although it's great when you can do something like this where baby's sort of straddling dad's legs so they can push into the chair. If for if, for example, baby is too low, if you bring them to the table and put them in your lap, like the table itself is a little too high, put a pillow or towel roll or book under your booty or the parent's booty, not under baby's booty, because that makes them a little bit more wiggly. So under your booty sits you up a little higher, which will sit baby up a little bit higher. And then the other example that we like, which is no high chair needed, is simply bringing baby to the floor and sitting them between your legs. So Kim here is in a long sit position. Baby Blythe is seated between her legs in more of a ring sit position. And again, using Kim's body to have a ton of support to her trunk, which allows her to explore with her hands. Kim is right there. She's looking down at baby. You lose the element of baby watching you in this position, but if you have another caregiver at home who's eating, then you can have them watch their other caregiver while you are providing some support. Kim has her hand against Blythe's trunk to give her that extra bit of support so she has full control as she's exploring with her hands and putting the food in her mouth.
All right, so now we're just going to go through some basics of what baby-led weaning is. There's a lot of chatter on the internet, on any kind of place that are Instagram especially, about what baby-led weaning is, what it's not. There's the Facebook baby-led weaning police that tell you you're doing something right or wrong, but we want to think about this just in terms of a developmentally appropriate way for a baby to transition to solids. If we're thinking about transitioning to solids, the overall goal is to help baby come into the family meal and to learn to self-feed and to, most importantly, in Carrie and I's opinion, learn to chew safely. While the nutrition from table food starts to become more important in that second half of the first year of life, they are still fully supported by breast milk and formula. This period is for learning and building the skills that they need to support their nutrition from table food when they hit toddlerhood. So the idea of baby-led weaning is we're going to use baby's current developmental skills to self-feed from the very beginning. This does not mean that you're skipping pureed foods. It just means that, generally speaking, it's recommended to skip special foods for babies. So jars of baby foods, etc. Now, can those still be used, especially if a family has them? Absolutely, they can. Baby can still feed themselves with those pureed textures. The other thing we like to keep in mind is that just because a food is pureed doesn't mean it's a food that the entire family might not also enjoy. So things like yogurt, sauces, oatmeals, dips, you name it, there are a lot of different consistency or pureed type consistency foods that the entire family may enjoy that can be shared with baby too. So we'll still get that nice back and forth modeling, everybody doing the same thing from the beginning. Again, the focus here is on skill building and sensory tolerance. So the idea here is that baby is going to practice the skills they need to eat a wide variety of food textures, all during that time that they have that nutritional safety net. They're also going to get a wide exposure to different flavors and textures during the time that they are the most open to it. And by the time they hit that more pokey selective phase in toddlerhood, they have a really good foundation of oral motor skills, and they have a wide variety of understanding of what different flavors taste like, what different textures taste like. So they actually can handle those foods when the nutrition really does matter. We're going to dive much more deeply into how this all works and how the physiology of building chewing skills works here. But generally, what happens is the food needs to be big enough that the baby can pick it up and self-feed it, or the food should be sticky enough that it can stick to a spoon or to baby's fingers. So if it's pureed, they can actually get it to their mouth. There's going to be chewing reflexes and protective reflexes that help them build skill and keep them safe at the same time. And this is all going off of the research that tells us that self-feeding decreases choking risk. Now, we're going to bring this up time and time again during this presentation. But this research actually started in nursing homes, where they found that when nursing home residents were being fed by licensed providers or trained providers, there was actually a higher risk of choking as opposed to when nursing home residents fed themselves. So if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because when we are actively engaged in the act of eating, our brain is more prepared for what's going to happen. When we're being fed, it's a dependent action, a dependent activity. Our brain is less ready to coordinate all of the muscles that are needed to contract all at the same time to make us swallow safely. So while that research started in nursing homes within the geriatric population, it's been repeated not only in the infant population under multiple studies, not just one. It's also been repeated with a population of developmentally disabled adults, typically developing babies. We've got a wide variety of literature to support this here. So we're going to bring this back over and over and over again. But just to give a quick video here, you can see Amelia, she reaches out for this piece of brisket, grabs it with her whole hand, brings it to her mouth, and starts munching. Now, this may freak you out by seeing this. You may be like, oh my gosh, how is this safe? This makes no sense. We're going to dive deep over the next few slides into how this works, how baby stays safe, how this helps them learn, and how this helps support their nutrition eventually.
And we want to just acknowledge for anyone doing this a long time or has their own kids who are now a little bit older, this is a departure from the quote unquote traditional method of starting solids, where you begin with rice cereal, you serve those thin, watery purees, and then you slowly progress to thicker textures and lumpy textures, and then eventually you're getting to little pieces of finger foods. This kind of flips all of that on its head. And then we want to just acknowledge, one, that method is in many ways not research based. It is not based in how infants actually learn to eat. It was a decision that was made by more a company level that this was a safe way for babies to start solids. And there are many pieces of that we still use. Like Kim said, there are still purees being offered. There are still textures that we're serving to baby where we're giving them some easy things and then helping them build skill over the long run. But what the research is pretty clear on now is that the traditional method is not an effective way to build chewing skills. And babies are their most developmentally ready to build chewing skills. The research is really clear on this, between around 6 to 9 months old. They have all the skills that they need, and they have a maximum amount of interest in trying to build those skills at around 6 to 9 months old to eventually learn to chew. And when we introduce babies to chewable foods and textures beyond 9 months old, the research shows us that babies have a more challenging time learning to chew. And by the time they hit toddlerhood, they're less likely to be eating a varied diet that includes more challenging foods like fruits and vegetables.
So this is totally just, if you happen to like the idea of food anthropology and you're curious about it, this book is really cool. It's called Inventing Baby Food by Amy Bentley. So if you're curious about like how this all happened and, you know, the origins of Beechnut and Gerber and all the baby food brands and how they became the medical way, this book is really, really neat. And I highly recommend it if you
And we had a question about teeth. Does it matter if baby has teeth? Because you can see Amelia here is eating steak, and it seems like she would need a set of teeth to do that. In reality, you do not need teeth. Baby has very strong jaws. We all have very strong jaws, and their gums are able to start to break down that food along with the saliva in their mouth, which helps to break down that food. But what Amelia is doing right now is not fully grinding and fully masticating that piece of steak. She is practicing the motor pattern of chewing well before she's going to be able to fully chew and swallow that food. So what's going to happen is she will chew that food for a bit and then she'll spit it out, or she'll gag it out, or she'll lose interest and move on. She's not going to get that steak into her belly the way she would get a bowl of pureed steak into her belly if you sat there and spoon fed her the pureed steak. That being said, Kim already mentioned this, but baby doesn't really need a spoonful or a bowlful of pureed steak in their belly at first. They need to practice chewing skills while they have the safety net of breast milk and formula to give them the nutrition that they need as they learn the essential skills so that they can eventually eat that steak that the family is eating and serving by the time they hit toddlerhood. So teeth are
So,
not essential. They
so
are good.
something else that's really interesting about teeth is that we like babies get their teeth in the front first, right? Like I've never seen a baby pop a molar first. And our front teeth are not the teeth we use to chew. And I know this sounds like crazy, right? But the teeth who we use in the front are for biting and tearing. They are, like Carrie said, they're not grinders. Those teeth in the back, your molars, are actually your grinding teeth, and those don't even come in until toddlerhood. So those teeth in the front will facilitate baby being able to actually do more tearing and more biting, but that doesn't mean that they can't explore the food and build these skills all at the same time.
So we're going to show you a few more videos of babies using this approach because we think that the video speaks so much louder than us telling you about it. But you have a video of Ripley here at 9 months old exploring oatmeal. And oatmeal is a food that you would normally expect to serve to a baby, whatever approach you're doing. But the beauty of this is that Ripley has the spoon and she has full access to her bowl. She is in charge of the activity. It is baby led. She reaches out, she's playing with the spoon. She's using her other hand to eat a little bit of the food. There is so much learning going on here as Ripley is eating and exploring the oatmeal. There's lots of mess. There are going to be mistakes. She's not getting in as much as she could get in or as efficiently as she could get in the food if she was doing it with a parent who is scooping and handing it to her. But there is so much motor learning, oral motor, fine motor learning happening when she explores it on her own.
And for any of you that have ever been working with a family that tells you, you know, baby won't let me feed them, they're not interested, this is a perfect example to show when we give baby the ability to control the situation, it's much more likely that they will engage. Outside of awkward romantic situations in our adulthood, is there any other time in our life where we are fed by someone else? And the answer really is no. And when it comes to all of the other developmental skills that babies acquire during their first, say, 5 years of life, whether that is learning to roll, learning to grasp items, learning to open and close a box, learning to use their pincer grasp, we don't do it for them. We allow them to do trial and error practice to learn these skills. But for some reason, when it comes to starting solids, there's this idea that we have to do it for them. And then one day they just flip a switch and they do it for themselves. But if we treat this like every other developmental skill, we would give them the opportunity to safely try, make mistakes, fumble, figure it out, and build those skills along the way.
One element that we love that is being built with this approach is active motivation, internal motivation to explore food. You are building internal motivation so that as baby approaches toddlerhood, they continue to be internally motivated to explore food on their own terms, not based on what somebody else tells them is the right amount of food or the right pacing of food, but on their own internal motivation. And this extends beyond the table in terms of building babies' natural curiosity to explore their environment on their own terms. You can see this video of Kailani here in the middle. Can play it one more time. There we go. She's 6 months old and she's exploring watermelon, a much softer texture. She has managed to bite off pieces of the watermelon, which at 6 months old, she doesn't have great chewing skills. So she's going to munch on that food and eventually either gag or spit it back out, or she will use her gums, her tongue, and her jaw to break that food down further and swallow it. She's got a piece that fell off. She was trying to pick it up with her fingers, but she does not have enough fine motor control to pick that small piece up. She only has a gross grasp, which allows her to pick up the large piece of watermelon, which is why the little piece sort of flits away and she loses it. And then she goes back to this bigger piece, which Kim has said this already, but is an essential size for baby if you want them to self-feed, which we know increases safety. All right, then we have this video of Cooper at 7 months exploring a cooked carrot. So you can see as he explores the carrot will sort of bend a little bit, and so you can see it's soft, but he has a little gag and a cough there. but the food itself, as he puts it in his mouth, is triggering his chewing reflexes. And those reflexes over time build to be chewing skills. So at first, it's not skill, it's just a reflex. But the more he does it, the more he practices, the more skill gets built. And as he does it, he has these protective reflexes that we're going to talk about that help to keep him safe and reduce the risk of choking should he bite off a piece like Kailani did with the watermelon. But you can see in all three of these videos, which I think is beautiful, the interest, the engagement, the natural curiosity. Nobody is telling them to do this. No one is encouraging them or trying to force them to practice. They are naturally motivated to do this.
So Carrie has been alluding to this. We've been talking about it a lot, but now we're going to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of actually how this works. So again, when babies learn to do any motor movement, it is based on underlying reflexes. They learn to grasp through a palmar reflex. They learn how to look at their hand through ATNR. They also learn how to roll via ATNR. They use their reflexes to build the skills that they need to move as they grow. They do the exact same thing with chewing. And again, for some reason, this element of learning to eat was just kind of ignored for a long time. But babies will use reflexes that are very strong around 6 months to build these chewing skills as they practice. So there are two main reflexes that they learn to that they use to build chewing skill. The first one is going to be their transverse tongue. So it's going to be the side to side tongue movement, and their phasic bite, which is going to be a chewing reflex. The transverse tongue reflex happens when the side of the tongue is stimulated. So the lateral border of the tongue is stimulated. The tongue is going to move laterally to meet the stimulus. The phasic bite reflex is stimulated when the gums are touched. So if the gum is touched by a stimulus, the jaw drops and elevates and makes basically a chewing motion. So those two reflexes together are essentially the building blocks of chewing. If you have something in front of you right now and you put it in your mouth, the first thing that you do is your tongue pushes it over to the side or over to the molar ridge. You initiate mastication, so you start chewing it with your molars. Your tongue moves it back to the center, and then you move it backwards to swallow. These two reflexes teach baby or give baby the ability to do those first two steps without having to learn anything. So the goal is the food is a size and a shape that they're able to get into their own mouth to stimulate those two reflexes to basically chew and practice chewing over and over and over again, building those building blocks so their brain's like, wait, I actually know what to do when food goes in my mouth. These reflexes tend to start to fade somewhere between 9 and 12 months. Every baby's a little different, so I can't tell you it goes away at a certain age, but somewhere between 9 and 12 months, these reflexes get less and less strong. As the reflexes get less strong, baby's skill level continues to increase, and by the time those reflexes truly are no longer there, they have the motor patterns already laid out so they know what to do. Now, tongue thrust is something that's really important to bring up because this comes up all the time in terms of we can't start solids until the tongue thrust is gone. Do we need to be worried baby's spitting out food, et cetera, et cetera? So I want to make sure that we touch on this. The tongue thrust reflex is present at birth, and it's there to help with latching at the breast or the bottle. The tongue is touched, you see a protrusion of the tongue. Again, this is to help essentially to latch onto a nipple for feeding. This reflex tends to integrate somewhere around 4 months of age. But the thing that is forgotten here is that just because the reflex is gone does not mean that that motor pattern is now not very well established and familiar. So even though the reflex may be gone, that forward backward tongue movement motion is something that the baby knows really, really well. So in the event that something goes in their mouth, even if the reflex is gone, most likely the thing that they're going to initially do, especially if it touches the middle of their tongue like a spoon of puree, is push the tongue out. That is a pattern that they know. They're doing it because they've been practicing it over and over and over again for the last 4 to 6 months. Now, when it comes to starting table food, this is also there as a protective mechanism, because if baby is practicing chewing with those chewing reflexes and say they do take a bite of something, but they just haven't figured out how to move it backwards to swallow yet, when it touches the center of their tongue, what most likely do we get? That movement pattern that they're familiar with. that spitting pattern. There is nothing wrong with babies spitting food. We expect them to spit food. It's part of the learning process. And honestly, when they stop spitting food and keep the food in their mouth, we're like, oh, okay, they're figuring it out. They're learning that their tongue has more movement patterns than just that forward back one that they've been practicing for the first few months of their life. Now, also in terms of keeping babies safe, they have a very small oral cavity. So there's this thought that, a piece of food is just going to break off and it's going to roll around in their mouth and it's going to get lost and then they're going to choke on it. Well, in reality, babies' oral structures are tightly packed. They have extra brown fat in their cheeks, which keeps the space between their gums and their cheek very, very close together, as well as the fact that their airway is much higher than it is in childhood. Their soft palate is lower, and the back of their tongue is higher. So it's not purpose or perfectly diagrammed here, but I can get my little laser pointer now. But in infant anatomy, the back of the tongue here, the soft palate, these two are very, very close together. And in most situations, they're almost touching. So the airway itself in the young baby is practically closed off while all of this is happening. It's not likely that something's just going to fall back into the airway and be choked on. Now, in addition, babies and human beings in general have an extremely strong swallow reflex. So if anything gets as far back as the posterior faucial arches, so if we look inside your mouth, the arches, when that is stimulated, a swallow happens. When the swallow happens, which is a brainstem response, the airway shuts off via a variety of mechanical muscle movements, closing and pulling the airway out of the way. The food tube, the pharynx opens up, sucking the food down towards the stomach, and then the airway reopens. So just because food is in the mouth, whether it's well chewed or not, does not mean it's going to be choked on. That food will most likely be swallowed. Now, can a really large piece of unchewed food cause someone to choke? Hypothetically, there could be a situation where the pharynx would get so stretched and full that it could apply pressure on the breathing tube. But more likely than not, there would just be a really uncomfortable kind of heavy swallow to bring that down. We've all swallowed a piece of meat that was too big before, but it's not inherently unsafe to swallow a very large piece of food. In addition, babies and humans in general have an extremely strong cough response. There is a lot of confusion that aligns coughing and choking as the same thing, but they are actually completely disparate. Choking is a complete occlusion of or partial blockage of the breathing tube. If a baby or a child or an adult is coughing, that tells us that air is flowing through the breathing tube in order to allow them to cough. The cough is there as protective. So if anything gets anywhere near the breathing tube, the cough initiates air coming out through the trachea and pushing anything out to keep us safe. So if a baby, a child, an adult is coughing, keep them coughing. That means that their body is doing exactly what it needs to protect itself. Is there anything else, Carrie, that I missed on there?
No, just as clinicians, I think it's not that we expect you to explain all this to a family. This is complex. It's very involved. It's obviously too much for a family. So it's just saying something like your baby was born to do this. They have all of the skills they need before they get started to do this and to do it safely. As clinicians, we just want you to know that this is very well steeped in infant oral motor development and in infant respiratory and oral physiology and anatomy. So it's not, again, just like, oh, Kim and I believe this, or, it seems like this works. We're telling you exactly what is happening there so you understand how it works, but we know that that's not something you're going to be explaining to most families because it's a little too in-depth.
On this slide too, we have gag reflex. We're going to talk a lot about gagging as we go on. So I say we keep going and we come back to that. Carrie, do you have a thought on that?
I'm with you, girl. Do it.
Go for it.
All right. All right, so again, what we're looking for at first are large pieces of food, which is very different than starting with purees. Of course, a family can do a week or two of puree feeding, or even a month of purees if they really want to, but there's no need for it. They can jump right into finger foods, and we want to aim for foods that are big enough that baby can pick it up with their hand using a gross grasp. So they have to be large enough to stick up above and below baby's hands because smaller pieces, even if baby can actually pick it up, will get lost inside baby's palm and they don't have the finger translation to move it up, down, or to open their hand and get it out of there. So larger pieces of food are better for self-feeding. They also provide ample tactile and proprioceptive input to baby's mouth, which is tons of sensory feedback to help trigger baby's chewing reflexes and to help baby learn. So the touch sensation, that tactile sensory information, and the proprioceptive input, which is the stretching to those joints and muscles and activation of those joints and muscles, help give feedback to baby's brain that gets them chewing, that helps them understand where the food is within their mouth, and to help them build what we call an oral map of their mouth, which is that ability to know what's going on inside your mouth, even if you can't see what's going on inside your mouth. So as adults, if you should bite into an omelet and a little piece of the shell is embedded in that omelet and you crunch on it, you're going to know it. You're going to recognize something is off. You're going to use your tongue to move that bite forward and spit it out. Or a lot of us can even find the shell within that bite, isolate it, and spit the shell back out while continuing to eat that bite of food. That is a very detailed oral map of your mouth that takes years to hone. So baby is building that little by little every time they are exploring food. And those big pieces of food, which give lots of sensory input to their mouth, are excellent at helping them build that oral map of their mouth.
And thinking about again how we think about feeding differently than everything else. Of course, we were taught you start with the Cheerios, little bite-sized pieces of food. But when we learn to do every other motor task, we start with big first. If you're learning to catch a ball, the first ball you learn to catch is a beach ball. And then you slowly start to catch a basketball. And then you figure out how to get a baseball and then maybe a golf ball. But the bigger the item, the more visual, touch, pressure sensation it gives to the muscles in the baby's body. So they're able to recognize it and respond from a motor perspective. These tiny pieces of food or a golf ball, if the baby was trying to figure out how to catch it, doesn't provide as much feedback to the baby's brain. So the brain is much more likely to not recognize it, to not know how to move it around, and to not be able to time all of those developing muscle movements to make these things happen. So, like Carrie said, not only are these pieces easier to hold and bring to the mouth, they're providing all of this input to the mouth so they actually build this map, but the mouth can actually say, oh, I know where that is. I can feel that. I can figure out how to move it. My tongue, that's just figuring out how to move stuff around, can find a big piece of food. That teeny tiny little thing is basically ignored by the brain because it just isn't there yet. The tongue doesn't know how to do that fine motor skill of figuring that out. Let me show you. So you can see this video.
Yeah, I love this video of Blythe. She's exploring a green bean, and you can see that the green bean itself is triggering her chewing skills. It's not that she's a great chewer, and then you can see she bites off a little bean. So as she's chewing, she gets off a little bean, which is something we would all consider to be sort of choking hazard size, right? But her mouth is engaged in the act of chewing. Her tongue is actively moving, and the oral structures that Kim talked about, that tightly packed back of the throat, make it really challenging for those pieces to move back. If they should move back, she is more than likely going to just swallow that piece of food. But because it's hard to move it back, what she does is chew it for a minute and then spit it out or move it forward, and it falls out of her mouth.
You can see it right here. It's on her shirt right there. But we can watch this one again. Like Carrie said, this is such a great video just to see the skill development, the swallow, or the reflex, that reflexive chewing. You even just saw a little tongue thrust. She kind of pushed it a little bit with her tongue. Up, up, and there it goes out. It was so quick, you could barely see it.
And I like this one because it's really clear that it's not an accident. It's not like she bit off that little piece, she got in there, and then it just fell out of her mouth. She worked at moving it forward as she was chewing. That's a really advanced skill. And as an OT, I learned early on in my practice that babies did not have this type of skill, that this was something that came much later, but we are seeing it more and more in younger babies who get started with this approach because they have this ability to build this oral map and these skills really early. Okay, I think we said the other things already, which is just again that this approach triggers our chewing reflexes, which practices the skills of chewing so that eventually baby can break down this food and swallow it. They have this reflexive airway protection as well as these oral motor mechanisms, including anatomy that is slightly different that helps to protect them. And the self-feeding on its own, aside from all of those things, helps reduce the risk. And then this is an example of smaller pieces of food in a 7-month-old versus bigger pieces of food. And we love these videos because I think it makes it really clear why we're not serving a 7-month-old smaller pieces, even though it might feel safer because historically we said smaller pieces for babies.
And I don't want to be snarky by any means, but this video is just one of those things that we like to share to healthcare providers, because when you look at what the AAP specifically says about when can babies start finger foods, the healthychildren.org website says that when your baby can sit up and bring food to the mouth, you can start with finger foods. Great, awesome. Aligns with all of the other recommendations we know about readiness. But then it follows up with saying that the pieces of food need to be small and bite-sized for baby so it is safe for them to swallow. Well, we know from the research, again, that we've brought up multiple times, that self-feeding decreases choking risk beyond any other thing. The number one way to decrease choking risk is to self-feed. So what can a baby, when a baby can sit and bring food to their mouth, they are typically around 6 months of age. And what can a 6-month or a 7-month-old baby do? What can they do with their hands? So here's a great example. And again, this is my daughter, who's the daughter of an OT. So if any baby's going to have excellent fine motor skills, I would assume it's going to be mine. And this is 7 months old with little bite-sized pieces of pear.
She's got the interest. She immediately sees the pieces and goes for it. And she actually has really beautiful thumb and finger isolation, well beyond what I would expect for a 7-month-old. Usually you see this closer to 8 months or even 9 months is when a nice pincer grasp tends to develop. So she's trying, she's going for it. She's chasing these pieces. She almost gets them, but she does not actually successfully get them. She can't actually pick them up. She sticks with the activity longer than a lot of babies would stick with this activity. Great attention span, really nice effort there, but she's not successful. This video goes on for quite a while with actually picking up those pieces of food. Now let's contrast that with what we see on the right side of the screen. When Kim serves her a large piece of pear, takes her a second, slips out of her hand. She's smart enough to bring the second hand in to help her, and she immediately gets it to her mouth. So now she's exploring. Now she's building chewing skills. Those little pieces of food can't even get into her mouth. And if they did get into her mouth, you'd see a similar pattern to what's going on with her hands, which is that those pieces get lost. They're not big enough to give her the sensory feedback she needs to actively work on them. Whereas this big piece immediately is successful with being self-fed and then triggers those reflexes.
And she still is a great eater, so.
All right, so we've already hit on this, but when it comes to preparing food to be safe for your baby, we want to make sure that the pieces of food are generally big enough that baby can pick them up and self-feed them. We are not going to tell you how to prepare every single food for baby because every food has a slightly different style and approach to make it as safe as possible for baby. But know that in general, we're looking to make things grabbable, so they have to be big. We're looking to make things at first a little bit soft or soft enough that baby can mash them with their gums and their tongue and their palate. Although we'll talk about other textures that are perfectly fine for baby at first that aren't soft and easily mashable. But for example, apple, you can see that in this example, at 6 months is cooked halves. So it's big enough for baby to grab and it's cooked so it's soft so baby can naturally and easily break it down with just a little bit of effort from their jaw. We want to make sure that we take extra steps to minimize the elements of the food that can increase the risk of choking. So for example, you can see here in the tomato in the how to cut tomato for babies, at 6 months, we're saying give them something big. Don't do a cherry tomato at 6 months because baby's not going to be able to pick it up on their own. Let's minimize the choking elements. So hard, round, slippery, compressible, those are things, tapered ends, those are things that are going to increase the risk of choking. We want to reduce those elements and increase the likelihood that baby will explore that food safely. So
These
I think
these images that are in here are from the free version of our app. So again, this is completely free. They can cancel out of the paywall and they can go into the app and search for whatever food they maybe have in their fridge. So maybe they have avocado. These images all come up here um, under how to search.
all accessible for free on our website as well as in our app.
So, and they can search, I think there's over 500 foods in here at this point, and it's growing every single day. So they can just search for, the safety information is always free in here, or they can, I don't think we need to look at sunflower seed oil, but
You click on the food, it will show you how to safely prepare it. So this to me as a clinician who worked in rural primary care was essential. Like this is what's missing. When you're a clinician and you have a very limited amount of time and you're trying to advise families on this, you can't sit there and tell them how to cut every single food, but this will show a family how to safely prepare just about any food that they can think of for their baby safely at 6 months old, at 9 months old, and beyond. So they are more than welcome to use that. But in terms of other things, other preparations for food for baby, I talked about those soft foods, but there are other textures and other ways to prepare foods that are totally appropriate for a 6 month old. Doesn't just have to be soft cooked avocado or apple or banana that's easily mashed. So you can serve purees and mashes, of course. Large soft pieces of food. You can see here, egg is another example of that, a scrambled egg strip or a broccoli that's been steamed or cooked until soft. But I think the most surprising one for a lot of families and clinicians is this one on the far right, which is large unbreakable foods. We call these resistive foods, or sometimes we call them resistive food teethers because they function like a teether toy for a baby, but they're actually food. So these are foods that will not break apart in baby's mouth, even if they're gnawing and biting and munching on them. And that, in fact, if you as an adult bit and munched and gnawed on these items, it would be very challenging for you to break off a piece or bite off a piece. So some examples that you see here, starting on the far right, are a mango pit with a lot of the fruit flesh cut away. You have a drumstick or a chicken drumstick here in the next. Oh yeah, thank you with that nice laser. We have a corn on the cob. And for families who are worried, you can remove the pieces of the corn by cutting them off and just giving the cob so that they're just biting on the cob and getting that nice sensory feedback without that risk of biting off or popping the actual kernels.
and
One of
if they did want to leave the kernels on, it's also okay because the munching itself flattens out those kernels. And so the risk remains quite low. If they do want to leave the kernels on, it's also okay.
And we have for each of the how to cut sections for each food in our database, we also have videos that accompany that. So a parent can see what this looks like when a baby explores that food at 6 months. Usually it's like 6, 9, and 12. Sometimes it's 7, 8, and 10, but they can see how a baby is eating that food at different ages. The next one over is a spare rib bone. So for a family that's worried, you can cut off most or all of the meat. Make sure all the gristly bits, the loose bits, those are pulled away and removed, and give the baby the bone to gnaw on. This is an excellent way to build chewing skills, to give babies so much feedback to their jaw, and to get them little flecks of iron from the meat without that risk of them actually biting a big hunk of meat off, like you saw with Amelia, where she's exploring brisket, which is just a chunk of meat. And then the last one in this picture is the pineapple core. So same deal. People worry that pineapple is acidic and that will give baby a rash. Yes, that is true. But the core of a pineapple, when baby is just munching on it, is giving them nice sensory feedback. They're not eating a lot of this pineapple core. They're not biting through it and chewing it and consuming it. So all of these foods, we call them teethers because we want parents to know they're not going to fill baby's belly. We're not expecting baby to eat the pineapple core or to eat the spare rib or the corn cob. These are foods that baby can practice building chewing skills and explore the flavor and share what the family's eating in a low risk way.
And we could talk about food teethers for 3 hours. We love food teethers. We can give you all the science behind food teethers, but an important thing to note, because we get a lot of comments like, well, just give them a teether. Like, let's just give them a teething toy. I feel more comfortable doing that. The research on motor learning is clear that we learn skills by practicing doing the skill. So while you might give them a teether and they can chew on that teether, those skills don't necessarily translate to food. And when a baby is exploring a food teether, every single time that they get that food teether to their mouth, it may have a little bit different flavor. There may be a little bit more seasoning on one part. It may be a little bit different temperature. Every little part of that pineapple core, there's little divots in it. It moves differently depending on where they've been munching on it. They'll get a little bit of juice out of it. So their tongue is going to figure out how to manage that liquid all at the same time. The skill building that happens when a baby practices with a food teether as opposed to just a plastic teething toy is light years different. And so there is value in the fact that this is actual food. In addition, when baby has a pineapple core, sister and mom and dad are eating pineapple. So there's that beautiful visual modeling that's going on, that everyone in the family is eating the same food. And we're establishing that routine that we all sit down together and we eat.
We've heard this so like time and time again from families of toddlers. My toddler used to eat that food. They used to love broccoli and now they won't eat it. And a lot of times when you ask them to clarify, they used to eat broccoli puree. They never ate broccoli florets. And it's really interesting when you think about the fact that broccoli puree looks nothing like a broccoli floret. It is a completely new food. So a toddler who is naturally resistive to new foods is going to refuse the broccoli floret that they've never seen before and that they believe is a new food, where they may be interested in the broccoli puree still. So helping the baby get used to the actual food in its actual form early does matter.
So we want to touch on this quickly. Carrie already mentioned a little bit about choking hazards, but we also want to mention that there is a handful of foods that a baby under 12 months should avoid. Now, I'm sure these things that are already in your wheelhouse, but we just want to touch on them quickly. So first, foods to avoid for babies under 12 months are things that would more likely make them sick. So these are going to be foods that carry a higher risk of foodborne illness. So of course, we all know no honey before one for the risk of botulism, but then there's also, especially in the world that we're living in right now, there's also the risk of unpasteurized dairy products, undercooked meat, meat and fish, other vegetables like bean sprouts that are raw that can carry a higher risk of foodborne illness. So we want to modify those foods by cooking them or pasteurizing them to make sure that they are safe for baby. And then honey, again, is avoided completely, even in cooked items until after one, because of the risk of infant botulism. In addition, we do want to avoid, or we want to recommend avoiding choking hazards that have very little nutritional value. Now, what we consider having nutritional value versus what my neighbor considers having nutritional value versus what Carrie considers having nutritional value is going to be different. Every family has different values around what food is nourishing for their family, and that's completely okay. But there are a certain amount of things that we know, like, for example, this picture of Skittles. We know that candy, generally speaking, does not have a high nutritional value, and the choking risk for candy is quite low. So we tend to recommend, sorry.
It's quite high.
Hi. So we tend to recommend to families avoid things like candy because though or hard candies, mini marshmallows, we'll talk about hot dogs in a minute, but things that are very low nutritional value, very high in choking risk, and also very challenging to modify to make safe for a baby. Now, we do want to touch on things like hot dogs, sausages. While those are not while processed foods like hot dogs and sausages may not be on the healthy list for some families, they are foods that are available, accessible, and affordable for others. It is possible to modify something like a hot dog to decrease the choking risk, to get rid of the round, springy, slippery nature of it in order to make it safe for a baby at every age. Would that be my number one recommendation over fresh food if it's available? No, but food is food, and making sure that our families are nourished is, of course, our number one priority. So if something like hot dogs is what a family has available to them, our app actually does have how to cut hot dogs for a 6 and 9 and 12-month-old to make sure that they are presented in a way that's safe as well. Now, Carrie touched on this again. Oh, sorry, do you have something?
I was going to hit on like the salt aspect of it, but do you want me to?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I think
Oh, my nose again.
Perfect. So I think that's something that comes up a lot, at least within our community. If people ask, well, what about salt? Is it appropriate to serve a hot dog to a baby? That's too much salt. Isn't that dangerous? The reality is that baby is small. Their kidneys are small. They don't process salt as well as an adult. So we do want to try and minimize the amount of salt that they get served where possible, but also know that baby and pretty much all adults and humans have a natural shutoff valve for too much salt. So it's really hard to get somebody, even a baby, to eat past that point of where salt becomes too much. Like if they were drinking a drink that was heavily, heavily salted, that could potentially do it. But even that,
Like soy sauce, like they
like
were
drinking soy
drinking
sauce,
soy
yeah.
sauce.
But even that, again, most of us have a shutoff valve. Most babies would not do that. They would stop because it doesn't taste good to them. They don't naturally want to do it. So there is a natural sort of like ability to regulate that. We, of course, can be cognizant of that. And again, if you're serving a salty food at one meal, you may serve less salt at the next meal or leave the salt off entirely and let the adult salt their own food. But also keep in mind that if a baby is doing this approach and you gave a 6-month-old baby hot dog prepared in a way that would be made safe for them, they don't yet have the skills to eat a large amount of hot dogs. So they're going to eat and explore a small amount of hot dog and then move on. So we're not expecting that the 6-month-old is going to eat a full meal of a hot dog, which will naturally also limit the amount of salt they get in.
And yes, of course, it's great to expose babies to a wide variety of flavors. But when we salt food, it tastes good. So we also want babies to know that food tastes good. And it's okay for us all to have a little bit of salt in our diet. And should we all decrease the amount of salt we put in our foods?
Yeah.
Absolutely too. So, but we have to be realistic about what families have accessible to them, but know that we have our pediatric GI doctor has scanned the research. There is no research that says that the salting food for baby is unsafe or going to cause any sort of specific health risk later, like obesity, et cetera. Kids that are at higher risk for familial risk for things like high blood high blood pressure and obesity. If they develop a palate for only highly salted foods, they will more likely eat more highly salted foods in toddlerhood and childhood, which then multiplies their risk factor moving forward. But this is a much more macro.
Exactly. And in our experience, helping a child to develop the flavor palette for nutritionally dense foods, the fruits, the vegetables, the unprocessed meats, the nut butters, the seeds and nuts, legumes, things like that. Helping them develop a palate for those things early is one of the most effective things we can do to help reduce the risk that this child is going to grow up and only eat processed foods. Those foods are really easy to get toddlers to eat and enjoy. They very quickly hit the pleasure centers of the brain, and most toddlers are like, I don't recognize it, but I will eat it. Great. So helping them practice those or building that flavor palette early matters. Helping them build chewing skills early matters because the most nourishing foods are almost always the ones that are the most challenging to chew. Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, seeds, nuts, meats. Those are foods that are really hard to break down. So we want baby to build chewing skills early so that they're able to eat those foods early on because they have a lot of nutritional value.
Carrie already mentioned the choking hazard elements, but they're here on the slide if you need them. Small, round or tapered, firm or compressible, and slippery. These are elements that make a food more likely to be a choking hazard. Again, just because if that little purple grape was in a baby's mouth, does that mean they're going to choke on it? No, because they have all the protective mechanisms to keep that grape out of their airway. But in the event that they are startled, they take a deep breath with that grape in their mouth, they are pushed out of their high chair, whatever happens, and they get distracted and all of their protective mechanisms fail. So they don't cough, they don't gag, their vocal cords don't close, you name it, it doesn't happen. We don't want that item to be exactly the right size, shape, and texture to get lodged in the airway and be challenging to cough out. So for example, in this picture of the two grapes, there's so much debate about grapes and how we need to cut grapes until our children go to college. But in reality, the purple grape is the one that scares me the most because that is exactly the right size and shape of an infant airway. That would not only get stuck in an airway, but we would be very, very challenging to push out if the baby were to cough. So we're thinking about things that would plug essentially the size of a drinking straw. So that's another reason why things like peanuts, pistachios can be really high risk. So those foods that are choking hazards, like grapes, like nuts, we do recommend modifying those foods for baby for their age to make sure that they still get exposure to those flavors and those textures, but we've made them as safe as possible while they're learning and exploring them.
All right, so here's just some examples of these reflexes in action. So baby Stevie here, who's I think 7 months, is exploring some food and ends up with a big piece in his mouth. So Kim is helping coach the family and coach baby to spit it out. So he goes for that piece and she just casually moves it away so he doesn't end up putting more food in his mouth on top of the piece that's in there. And she squats down low, so naturally baby is inclined to look down at her, which will put gravity on his side, and she puts her hand out under his chin to coach him. But again, his reflexes are in place to help him even without that. And then takes a second, but he works that piece forward and boop, out it comes. Because
if he were to swallow that piece whole, that's not inherently unsafe.
No.
So, but we were just practicing a skill at this point.
Yeah. So those reflexes help him move that food out. And you can see here with Mila, on the video on the right, she's exploring some food. She puts it in her mouth and she has a gag that helps move that food forward and out. And she kind of overstuffs. She's putting a little too much in her mouth because this is trial and error learning. She doesn't know yet that that's too much. She's learning what's too much. She's learning how to move it around and how to break it down. All of this is normal behaviors. There, cough and a gag. It pushes the food forward, and then her tongue does the rest of the work to push it back out as she keeps exploring.
And the thing that's really great, the thing that we can play it again so you can hear, but you can hear her breathing through this whole thing. So this is a perfect example of a time where a parent's like, oh my God, they're choking. And I can hear the child breathing at the same time. So it's a good time to remind the parent, we can hear them breathing, they're coughing. These are all signs that everything's going okay. You started to touch on overstuffing. I don't know. I mean, there's so many little details that we could.
Yeah. I mean, overstuffing again is a very normal part of the learning process. I think you can move forward from here, but just that almost all children will go through an overstuffing period. They'll go through it in infancy when they're just starting out, or if they don't, they will go through it when they're toddlers because it is how they learn about the boundaries of their mouth. I love this video.
Oh, I don't know why that one played first. Sorry. This
Right.
one.
I like this one of Atlas here. He's got a piece of steak in his mouth and he's just kind of holding it, which is nerve-wracking, but then boop, out it comes. He opens his mouth, he gags, he sticks his tongue out. Again, it is challenging to get the piece to move back. It is more likely that it gets spit out and gagged out. And then
another reason why being upright and having a foot plate so the baby's leaning forward is really, really helpful, because if they were reclined, gravity is not helping it stay forward. It's actually helping it move back, gives the tongue way less opportunity to control it.
And one thing that it's hard to catch in this video, but I'm going to point it out as this baby she ends up with a gag that moves. You'll see it in just a second. That moves the food forward in the mouth, but not out of the mouth. She doesn't actually spit it out, and it's coming up in just a second. And that is a sign of progress. Let's see. Oh, it's coming.
Right
there. Yep. She gags the food forward and then she just keeps going. She keeps chewing it. When we start to see baby do that, they gag it forward and then they keep chewing, you know they're building skill. Rather than gagging it forward and then spitting it back out, they recognize, oh, that wasn't chewed enough. They gag it and get it forward and then they keep working on chewing. It's an excellent sign of progress.
So this is just a visual that we like to help people wrap their head around the difference between gagging and choking, because we know that gagging can feel and look very, very scary. Some babies get really red. Some babies go silent. Some babies look like they're terrified when they gag. But gagging and choking are two completely different things. So gagging essentially is the brain's way of being like Carrie just said, wait, something's not right. I don't want to swallow this yet. And I don't want to choke on it, so I am going to make sure it gets forward and out of my mouth. So this happens with young babies when they put a toy in their mouth for the first time. A lot of young babies gag on pacifiers, they gag on their fingers because the brain again is like, nope, all I know is a nipple and I know a warm liquid moving in a very specific pattern. This isn't right. I'm going to turn on my alarm bells and I'm going to get this thing out. When a baby or anyone gags, the airway shuts off. So the epiglottis actually closes, protecting the airway. So when we gag, the airway is shut. While that's occurring, the pharynx has an upward contraction of the musculature, pushing things up and forward. So again, gagging is an up and out motion while the airway is closing down. In between gags, so if you have a baby that's gagging multiple times, like gag, 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 you'll actually hear them take a breathing break in between each gag. So when they gag, after the gag happens, the airway opens up again so they can get a breath, and then it closes down again when the gag occurs one more time. Choking, on the other hand, is a emergency, and no matter how a baby starts solids, it is imperative that every caregiver is trained in infant choking rescue. The most important thing that a family can do is make sure that grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and there was recently a video on CNN of a older sister performing choking rescue on the younger brother. Choking rescue is extremely effective. Choking is very responsive to appropriately performed choking rescue techniques. Make sure that everyone is trained. The biggest reason that we say this is that babies are statistically more likely to choke on non-food items away from the table than food items at the table. So the child is much more likely to be crawling around, pick up a Barbie shoe or something off the floor and experience a choking event there than they are to choke at the table. Our gastroenterologist has actually run all of the data through the CDC Wonder database, and it is choking in general is, Carrie, you're going to have to make sure that I've got these statistics right. Less than 1% of accidental deaths are on choking. So it's already extremely rare. And choking on food, I think, is 0.4%, right? Because it's 0.6 that's objects.
I don't remember the exact numbers. My brain does not, those do not stick, but it's very low. And again, it's more likely on non-food items than on food items.
So having families know what to do in the event of choking is absolutely important, but more importantly, having them know what to do with gagging. So like Carrie was talking about of the video with Stevie, even with spitting, if a baby is gagging, it's totally great to have a family kneel down next to the high chair so the baby looks down at them. Gravity is then helping with the gag. Tell the family to not ever put their fingers in baby's mouth because that's just potentially pushing that food around and not allowing baby to control it on their own, and they just have to wait it out. It can be very challenging. There are some babies that gag so hard they throw up, and while that is not fun to see, there we do have some strategies that can help with that. It is not inherently unsafe. So this is just a great visual. Retching, coughing, or crying, let baby keep trying. Panic, silent, or wheezing, baby's not breathing. So this is just our attempt to try to keep in mind that depending on baby's skin tone, they may not be turning blue, for example. They may look more ashen. It's more about what you're seeing baby do. The other difference that we like to identify that you can see here in the photo is that oftentimes with gagging, the mouth you'll see open, you'll see the tongue cupped, and it tends to be a forward type motion because again, gagging's trying to get something out. Choking, on the other hand, is a sucking in because the body is trying to get air into the breathing tube. So you might even see some tracheal tugging, but you're going to be seeing a backwards in pulling type motion in the event of choking.
All right, let's talk about allergies. So when it comes to introducing allergens to baby, the research is actually really clear now on some things that are different than it was even, say, 5 years ago, or especially 10 years ago. So again, if you've been doing this for a while or you have older children, you might have heard some different things. So first of all, most likely, if your child has a food allergy, it will be on 9 common allergens. We have egg, peanut, dairy, tree nuts, finfish, shellfish, wheat, soy, and sesame. Those are your 9 common allergens, and the vast majority of food allergies will be on those 9 foods. It's not impossible to have a food allergy to something else, say strawberry, but it's very unlikely compared to those 9 foods. So those are the foods that the research is clearest on. Early introduction of those foods and then continued introduction of those foods. So keeping those foods in baby's diet frequently, and by frequently, the research shows around at least 2 times per week, is the best way to help reduce an infant's risk of developing a later food allergy. So again, this is different. If you've done this for a while, you may have heard wait on the common food allergens. Don't introduce peanuts until after a year or after 2 years for a high-risk baby. The research has shown that that actually significantly increases the risk of developing a peanut allergy. And the research is strongest with peanut, dairy, and egg. So those three foods in particular, we want to introduce early. They don't have to be the first food that baby is introduced to because it can be a little scary for a family to think that those foods might cause a life-threatening allergy. So you can start with other foods that are not considered 9 common allergens. But those foods, especially those three, egg, dairy, and peanut, should be introduced early, as close to around 6 months old as possible for most infants. And the research has actually identified a subset of infants who are considered at high risk for developing later food allergies. Those are infants with severe eczema or infants that have a pre-existing food allergy to another food, which is unlikely to be something you'll know at around 6 months old or 4 months old. But if they have already had a pre-existing allergy diagnosed, they're going to be considered at high risk or severe eczema. Those babies, the research shows introducing food allergens, those 9 food allergens, and especially those three, egg, dairy, and peanut, starting around 4 months old is important for reducing the risk of developing later food allergies. So that's not necessarily starting all solids. A lot of families are like, my doctor said start at 4 months because we want to reduce allergy risk. That's only for high risk infants, and it's only those particular foods. We'd want to introduce them early in small doses and then keep them in the baby's diet. People often ask, what if I have a pre-existing food allergy or a life-threatening food allergy? Or what if their sibling has a pre-existing food allergy, life-threatening food allergy? The research isn't actually supportive that that will increase babies' risks. So that's not one of the risk factors that we want to point out. If you go back, Kim, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit, but if you go back.
Sorry, we got a question too. My 2-year-old is
Oh,
allergic to those three mildly, but the pediatrician said it's just mild. How much should he still be eating these or avoid them?
I would strongly encourage you to ask for a referral to a pediatric allergist. So it's not an area where you want to sort of like make general recommendations, but we know that children can outgrow food allergies. We know that there are protocols for helping children to outgrow food allergies, and working with a pediatric allergist is your best way to do it safely. So,
And in terms of it being mild, there's also cases of like frequent exposure to a mild allergy making an allergy worse. So you may, like Carrie said, allergist is your
best bet.
best bet.
So in general, when it comes to introducing food allergens, again, we want to do it early, so around 6 months old. We want to introduce them one at a time. So while the research shows us that you can introduce baby to many foods, many new foods on one day that are not considered common allergens. So you could introduce baby on day one to, say, banana and broccoli. You wouldn't introduce them to 2 food allergens on the same day. So you wouldn't do egg and peanut on the same day. You would do those on separate days. Our allergist also recommends introducing the common allergen a few different times back to back. So that can be done over the course of a day. And she recommends 2 hours between each introduction at least. So you can introduce peanut butter, for example, in the morning with a small amount of it, then wait a few hours and introduce it again in the afternoon, and then wait a few hours and introduce it again in the evening to make sure that baby doesn't have a negative response. Or you can do that if you want to be more conservative over 3 days. So introduce a little bit of peanut butter on one day, wait a day, introduce a little bit of peanut butter the next day, wait a day, introduce a little bit of peanut butter the next day. You can also serve that common allergen with foods that are non-common allergens. So that doesn't mean you have to only do peanut butter for 3 days. You could do a little bit of peanut butter on banana if you've already introduced banana and baby seems fine with it. You can do a little bit of peanut butter the next day on broccoli. You could do a little bit of peanut butter on cantaloupe. There are lots of ways you can do it. And again, you can introduce baby to multiple new foods. So you could do broccoli and cauliflower and peanut butter all on the same day if you wanted to, but you wouldn't mix peanut butter into yogurt if baby's never been introduced to dairy, because those are 2 common allergens same day. The last thing that she likes to point out is allergic response can be dose dependent. So she recommends starting small, a tiny amount. You can see here in this video of Charles, the parent is introducing just a tiny amount of peanut butter on their finger. The video goes on, so the Charles actually ends up eating quite a bit of peanut butter, but one of those is plenty for the first introduction. And then the next introduction, you might give a little bit more, but a small amount can help to have a smaller allergic response if there is one, rather, excuse me, than serving a bunch of peanut butter where you may get a bigger allergic response if there's going to be one.
Speaking of allergic reactions, since you were just talking about it.
So this may be familiar to a lot of you already, and I know there's a question there, so okay, maybe you can look at that while I'm describing these. But what we want to advise families on is the symptoms to look out for that indicate their baby is having an allergic response. So when it comes to allergic responses, it's kind of broken into two buckets. One is a mild allergic response bucket, and the other is a severe allergic response bucket. There's no sort of middle ground where there's this like, is it a moderate? No, it's just mild or severe. And a mild reaction is one sort of system being involved with just a small bit of involvement. So for example, for me, it helps me to remember skin, respiratory system, and GI system. So when it comes to skin, that's itchy skin, that's rashy skin, that's hives, swelling, things like that. When it comes to respiratory system, that's difficulty breathing, that is wheezing, that's any sort of challenge with swelling in the airway. And then the third is GI symptoms, diarrhea, vomiting, gassiness, fussiness, upset stomach, things like that. So those are sort of the three systems involvement. If you have respiratory involvement, that immediately goes into severe. You're like, boom, you're right in the severe. We call emergency services and you ask for an EpiPen for emergency services to come with an EpiPen. If it's a skin involvement and they have a small rash, they have a few hives, little bit of involvement, that is considered a mild reaction unless it's paired with something else. Say they have that and they also have GI discomfort or some vomiting, that would be considered severe. Go ahead and call emergency services. We want families to know that it is better to call emergency services if they suspect an allergic reaction than to wait and wonder. If you have any concern, call emergency services. Another thing she likes to point out is, which you see in this baby, take their clothes off so you can see their whole body. This baby actually looks very comfortable from the neck up. You don't see these hives and the reaction on their face. So if they had clothes on, you could easily miss the fact that this baby is having some pretty severe hives and a skin response to the food they ate. So the last piece that she likes to point out is that it's so common for babies to get contact rashes, especially from foods that are acidic. Tomatoes, strawberries, pineapple, lemon, oranges, and
Nightshade
citrus.
vegetables.
Those types of foods very commonly cause skin reactions, but they're very localized to where baby touched the food. So often they're right around the mouth, they're on the hand, they may be on random spots on the cheek and face where baby touched their face after touching those foods. So you would want to like know that that's not a common allergen food, that was an acidic food, and then usually those will go away after you clean baby's face within an hour or so. You also in the future can put a barrier cream on baby's face to protect the skin to reduce the likelihood of them having that sort of skin reaction to that food. And that's important because she has seen in her practice a lot of times parents will believe the baby has an allergy to that food. Oh, they're allergic to strawberry or they're allergic to like onions or something that gave baby that type of reaction. And then they cut that food out where she wants more variety in the diet, not less.
You can also put the barrier cream on their butt too, because if they're getting redness around their face, they might get a diaper rash from pooping too. So, the question, Carrie, is how common is it that common allergens are being expressed in breast milk and babies having an allergic reaction?
That's a great question for our allergist. I don't know how common it is. I know that it is not enough for baby to be exposed to that common allergen through breast milk. So you can't rule out a food allergen or allergy to a food just because the parent is eating that food and breastfeeding baby. They have to actually consume that food. So I don't fully know how to answer that other than to say I suspect it is not super common for baby to have an allergic reaction to that food in breast milk. And if they are, then that would definitely be something. If you believe baby's having a reaction to that food through the breast milk, it's a great idea to talk to your doctor and to ask for a referral to a pediatric allergist early so that you can get guidance with that so the family doesn't unnecessarily avoid that food. Because if they believe baby has going to have a peanut allergy because of a response to breast milk, and then they don't serve peanut, the research actually shows us that will increase baby's likelihood to develop a peanut allergy versus if you do introduce peanut with the support of a pediatric allergist, you're more likely to reduce baby's risk of going on to develop a peanut allergy.
I just copied the question and I'll send it to our allergist and we can send it to Jennifer and hopefully get it to you. Because I'm also thinking about like cow's milk protein allergy and soy intolerance can be. I don't know. We'll get Dr. B to answer for you guys and share that with you.
A couple little things just because you guys are clinicians. Cow's milk protein allergies are one of the most common allergy to be outgrown and to be outgrown early. Our allergist, Dr. B, has said that a lot of babies who show that allergy early will outgrow it before they turn 12 months old. So you can often bring dairy back in before they turn 12 months old. Again, talk to their pediatrician or their primary care provider and if necessary refer to an allergist, but know that that can be outgrown. And there was another thing I was going to say. I've forgotten.
We didn't talk about F pies.
Yeah, you can talk about that. That wasn't what I was going to say. I can't remember, but it'll come to me.
Very quick, just touch on FPAs because we only have one more slide. We are like timing this perfectly today. But one type of allergic reaction is a delayed allergic response called FPIES, food protein induced enterocolitis syndrome. So again, it's very rare and it is unlike typical food allergies that present mostly within the first 15 minutes of eating the food. FPIES is a delayed response. So typically within 2 to 3 hours of eating the food, the baby will have GI related symptoms
Good morning.
like vomiting and
Someone
sorry.
be muted.
That's okay. Like vomiting and excessive diarrhea. The concern with FPIES is that the baby could vomit or have so much diarrhea that they become dehydrated. There are certain foods that are more likely FPIES triggers. We have a list of those on our website, so you are more than welcome to look at those. But keep in mind that FPIES is a very rare food allergy. But if you have a parent being like, every time I give my baby avocado, they throw up 2 hours later, red flag, have them talk to their pediatrician.
I just wanted to point out just that we have a wonderful article on our website. It is also available in our app for, I think, paid subscribers, but for free on the website that shows examples of skin reactions on babies with lots of different skin tones because it can be very easy to recognize big red hives on a very pale skinned baby, but more challenging to notice that those are happening on a darker skinned baby. So I really love the article because it shows really clearly what parents should look out for.
All right, so here's just a really quick review of feeding schedules because we get a lot of questions from providers about this and from parents alike. But when we start introducing solids, like when in the heck do families do this? So it's important to remember that in the beginning, the first few months, this is all about exploration and learning. It's not about filling the belly. It's not about teaching baby that food actually makes them feel full. So we're only recommending one meal a day to begin with. This is just, and it's not even a meal. It is one opportunity to explore food. Around 9 months of age, we're recommending going up to 2 meal exposures, and around 10, 11, 12 months, we're going for 3. But keep in mind, every baby's different. It's completely fine. Some babies don't transition to 3 meals until 15 months. It's completely fine. It's just have to be somewhere within the realm of you start slow with one exposure, increase it around nine-ish months, and we're aiming for 3 meals around a year. The one thing that's important to talk to families about is that when they first get started, don't bring baby to the table hungry. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but baby does not yet have the skills to fill their belly with the food that they are learning about eating. And coming to the table hungry just sets them up for disaster. We want them to be, I know Maya's very loud and happy when she eats here, but we want them to show up at the table engaged and happy and wanting to play and touch and explore the food. If they show up hangry, they're just going to get frustrated that their belly is hungry and they can't get that food in their belly fast enough. So we recommend to families to do a breast or bottle feed, wait about 30-45 minutes, and then come to the table for your meal exposure. Now, as baby gets closer to a year, you can separate those out more. So you're giving an hour and a half, 2 hours between a breast and bottle feed and a solid food meal. But again, the whole point is that we're bringing baby to the table ready and willing to explore. We have really detailed feeding schedules on our page, on our website that a family can go in and kind of problem solve through what works for them. There is no right way to schedule these meals. It is all about figuring out what works for the family, figuring out what works for the baby, and trying to put those two together.
I remembered you were talking, and I remembered what I was going to say, which was just that our allergist suggests that families introduce a new common allergen, if possible, in the morning. That gives you all day to look for signs of an allergic reaction. Those signs are most likely going to happen immediately, somewhere within the first 15 minutes of introducing that food and 2 hours of introducing that food, although occasionally you get a response that happens a little bit delayed beyond that. So the most common response is going to happen within those first 2 hours. If you do it early on in the day, you have all day to get to your doctor or get emergency medical services if needed, versus if you introduce it at night and you're putting baby to bed soon, you're not going to be able to monitor them. And if something should happen, it can be harder to get to your doctor and get guidance. Man,
Good
sorry.
job, Carrie. All right, look, we finished with 3 minutes to go, but just here are some resources for all of you. This is our Instagram page in the center. We have tons of information posted. We post every single day in stories and in the feed. We share a lot of information. We discussed the app a little bit. We also have a guided experience for people that do want to pay for a subscription, but all of the safety information is free. So the how to cut is all there. Our website is also an incredible resource. I'm going to see if I can. Is it sharing then? No, it's not.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can switch over to this.
No, you are.
Oh, I am. You can see
Yeah.
it. Perfect.
Mhm.
So you can search in the search bar like spitting. You see the articles?
Yep.
Okay. So you can search spitting and they come up and you can click, here's an article, how to teach babies to spit. Here's an article all just about
Is it normal and what happens when baby spits? We have lots of resources that are available for free on our website, which
overstuffing, like basically any topic, anything that happens, it's here. We can help.
while Kim's doing that, are there any questions? I know we said ask them along the way and you guys have asked questions, which is great. But if anything else has come up and you have a question, now's the time. Feel free to write it in or so our website you can switch over to the Spanish version of our website. Most of our resources are translated, not 100% of them, but we work hard to try and get our resources translated for those families that need it.
And the app, you can toggle into Spanish too.
Yep. And
so these are our emails. Please feel free to reach out. We are always happy to answer questions and to guide you to what the right resources. We are here. We obviously love talking about this. And we will send the slide deck as a PDF to Jennifer so she can share it with you guys if you want to dive into any of this literature, if you find that fun on a weekend or something.
Thank you all.
But yeah,